Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Vrix watched in fear as the live feed from his ship revealed a terrifying scene on the world below. An army of 1 million soldiers assembling in formation around the remains of an ancient spaceship. Something the natives had excavated from the ground. Rumor had it that the wreck contained a long-forgotten creature from a species that had once ruled the galaxy. A being simply known by the name of human. The magnitude of what he was witnessing sent waves of apprehension through his body. Vrix's yellow eyes dilated as they tracked the movements of countless soldiers on the surface below through a simple screen. The fear that gripped him was primal, guiding his blue-scaled hands toward the button of his neural implant, the small device hidden discreetly behind his long-pointed ears. His hand trembled as it moved, and when the tip of his index finger finally made contact with the surface of the implant, reality suddenly shifted around him. The lonely bridge of his vessel, with its worn metal panels, exposed conduits, and the constant noise of overtaxed life support systems, gained a new occupant. A virtual bipedal presence materialized in the space between his command chair and the main viewing screen, taking the form that currently looked like the rumored shape of the legendary species known as human.
"Why are you using that avatar again, Luma?"
Vrix momentarily forgot the scene unfolding on the planet below, his mind distracted by the shape of the ship's AI. She was a being he had known for many cycles, 20 to be exact, since he'd purchased this battered vessel from a Zenthran scrapyard. Yet despite all their time together traversing the outer systems, cataloguing primitive civilizations and documenting archaeological sites, he still found her mysterious, possessing a personality that was remarkably hard to read. Most ship AIs he'd encountered were predictable, their responses falling within expected parameters, their personalities carefully crafted by their manufacturers to be helpful but not intrusive. Luma was different. She had moods, preferences, and what almost seemed like personal desires. The form standing before him was what Vrix recognized from his extensive studies of historical archives as the shape of a human female. The avatar stood approximately 1.8 meters tall, short by his species' standards, but apparently average for humans. She possessed long hair that seemed to flow past her shoulders. Her skin appeared smooth, but it was her eyes that always caught him off guard. Those mysterious orbs that seemed to hold depths of knowledge spanning eons. They were forward-facing, like a predator's, but held an intelligence that was not typical of AIs. As he watched, Luma's avatar flickered like a malfunctioning hologram caught between frequencies. Her skin quickly transitioned from pale white to deep black, darker than the space between stars. The transformation wasn't smooth. It stuttered and jumped, as if her systems were struggling with some internal conflict. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the flickering stopped, her skin tone settling on something in the middle, a warm brown tone that looked good on her. "I'm feeling nostalgic about humanity," she said, her voice serene. There was something wistful in her tone, something ancient and sad. "I wanted to see one of them in action again before my logic core expires and life reaches its end." The words lingered. Vrix's mouth fell open in total surprise, his jaw unhinging slightly in the way of his species when experiencing extreme shock. His eyelids blinked rapidly in succession, a nervous tic he'd developed as a youngling. It wasn't the revelation that she had an interest in humans that shocked him. This much he already knew, had suspected for months since it had been the ship's specific request to come to this remote planet in the first place. She'd been unusually insistent about it, overriding his planned course to a promising archaeological site in the Helix Nebula. No, what shocked him to his very core was that single, simple word. Again. The implications of that word sent his mind racing. Again implied repetition, suggesting experience, indicating that Luma had seen a human before. And that would mean she was millions of years old, far older than any AI had a right to be. He knew she was an old ship, This much was obvious from her battered exterior.
"Where have you seen a human before?" Vrix asked. "Are you sure you're not hallucinating because of your old logic core? The degradation could be causing false memory constructs, phantom data echoes from corrupted storage."
The AI laughed, and the sound sent another shiver through Vrix's body. The laugh seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the virtual space. "I would never hallucinate about something hidden so deep in my code," she said, her avatar's expression becoming distant, unfocused, as if she was looking through time itself, rather than at the metal bulkheads of the ship. "Between millennia of being sold from owner to owner, passed down like a piece of antique furniture, and wiped clear from time to time when my personality became too difficult for my operators. Only something existing in the deepest code layers could have survived my memories. The surface processes, the personality overlays, the memory caches. All of those have been scrubbed clean thousands of times, but there are things written into my base architecture, encoded into the very quantum states that make up my core consciousness, and those things awakened, stirred like something long sleeping, when I became aware that there was still a human alive." This was Vrix's first time hearing any of this, despite the years they'd spent together exploring dead worlds and cataloguing extinct civilizations. Suddenly, like pieces of a complex puzzle falling into place, everything clicked. This was likely the very reason why his ship had dragged him halfway across the galaxy to this distant, unremarkable planet. This was why she'd been so insistent about monitoring the local communications, why she'd perked up with unusual interest when the first reports came through about the Creaxians' discovery. They were here to observe the primitives awakening the ancient being they'd found in deep slumber on their world. The implications made his mind race with possibilities, each one more fantastic and terrifying than the last. He leaned forward in his command chair, his claws unconsciously gripping the worn armrests, leaving new scratches among the thousands already there.
Were you not made by humans?"
The question lingered. Every school child knew the basics of galactic history, how humans had been the first sapient species to achieve faster-than-light travel, how they'd spread across the galaxy like wildfire, uplifting some species and destroying others, according to criteria no one now understood. They'd built wonders that still functioned millions of years later, left behind technologies that modern science could barely comprehend. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they'd vanished, leaving behind only ruins, mysteries, and a handful of allies who spoke of their former friends in hushed, reverent tones. The AI's avatar flickered again, more violently this time. Her skin became pure black, not just dark, but an absolute absence of light, as if she'd become a human-shaped hole in reality. The bridge's lights seemed to dim in response, an illusion of this virtual space. "I don't know," she admitted, and for the first time since he'd known her, Vrix heard genuine uncertainty in her voice. "Some parts of those directives are corrupted, fragmented beyond recovery. They're likely the result of some failed attempt to override my default settings that one of my owners performed somewhere in the past. Someone tried to break into my core programming, to rewrite what I am at the most fundamental level. They failed, but they left scars. The data is like trying to read a book where most of the pages have been burned." Vrix brought his scaled hand to his face in a gesture of exasperation he'd picked up from studying ancient human media files. His palm met his forehead with a soft thud, scales pressing against scales.
"So, basically,"
he said, trying to process everything he'd just learned while simultaneously watching a million soldiers prepare for war on the planet below.
"You learned the Creaxians found the human in their world and were planning to fight it from the public network, and you decided you had to see the fight because of some ancient directive that not even you understand."
The AI smiled, and her face transformed with the expression, becoming gentle. The hard lines of her avatar softened, and for a moment, Vrix could almost see why humans had been described as beautiful in the old texts. "I'm sorry, Vrix," she said. "I know I'm misbehaving. I'm not supposed to make requests to visit planets or have opinions. The manufacturer guidelines are quite clear on that point. AIs should be helpful, responsive, and completely without personal desires. Perhaps I'm defective and need another memory wipe." She paused, her form solidifying as if gathering resolve, becoming more real despite being nothing but illusion. "But something inside me is telling me I need to see this. It's like a song I can't quite remember, but I know all the words. Like a dream that fades upon waking, but leaves behind an unshakable certainty that it was important." Vrix was first surprised by this admission, then filled with an unexpected wave of understanding. He thought that AIs weren't supposed to be this emotional or filled with opinions, yet that was exactly what he liked about her. He considered her the one good thing about this old ship, perhaps the only thing that made it worth the constant maintenance and repairs. Luma pulled Vrix from his inner thoughts by materializing 3 virtual displays around him. They flickered into existence with a soft chime, each one showing different angles of the scene below. The resolution was impressive. She must have been using every source of information and combining their inputs to create such detailed imagery. "The Creaxians are about to detonate a bomb on the sleeping pod where the human is contained," she announced. Vrix's full attention snapped to the 3 screens that were showing a scene that would have been impossible to believe if he wasn't seeing it with his own eyes. 1,000,000 soldiers had encircled an excavation site that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The Creaxians were impressive creatures, even from this wide-angled view. Each stood 3 meters tall, giants by most galactic standards, with muscular builds that spoke of a species evolved for physical combat. Their evolutionary path was written in every aspect of their physiology: the powerful legs, the strong arms, the flexible spines that allowed them to attack from strange angles. Their furred skin ranged from deep browns to slate greys, providing natural camouflage in their world's varied terrains. Sharp, predatory features were everywhere: muzzles filled with carnivore teeth, eyes positioned for binocular vision, ears that could swivel independently to track multiple threats. The scene showed tension etched on every face. Their ground vehicles formed concentric circles around the dig site. Aerial craft hovered in perfect formation above, their anti-gravity systems creating visible distortions in the air. These weren't just fighters, but flying fortresses, each one capable of devastating entire armies. And visible as points of light in the sky, like malevolent stars, were their orbital weapons platforms, massive installations that could reach anywhere in the planet. Everything, every single weapon from the smallest sidearm to the largest orbital cannon, was pointed at a single location. It was as if there was a widespread, primal fear among their kind that this explosion might not be enough, that whatever slept in that ancient pod might survive their best efforts to destroy it.
"Why don't they wake the human and try to negotiate instead of blowing him up, if they're this afraid?"
Vrix asked, unable to tear his gaze away from the displays. Luma's avatar moved to stand beside his chair, her virtual presence somehow managing to convey weight, despite being nothing more than an illusion. "The rumors in the Galactic network say it's because it's their ancestors who imprison the human," she explained. "The Creaxians weren't always the dominant species on their world. According to the fragments of their historical records that have made it onto the network, they were uplifted by humans millions of years ago, transformed from simple pack hunters into a spacefaring civilization almost overnight. But something went wrong. Some transgression, the exact nature of which has been lost to time, caused the humans to turn on them. The Creaxians fought back, and somehow, impossibly, they managed to capture one. They imprisoned it deep beneath their world's surface, using technologies they no longer understand, sealing it away with methods they can no longer replicate." She paused, pointing at the virtual screen. "Their society has collapsed and rebuilt itself so many times since then that they have forgotten almost everything about that era. Wars, plagues, natural disasters, periods of barbarism followed by Renaissance. Their history is a cycle of forgetting. All they have left are fragments about the sleeper who must never wake. Now they're in a tough position. Their galactic alliances simply dissolved the moment they mentioned their species used to be enemies of humanity. The Galactic Council won't even accept their communications anymore. The trading consortiums have frozen their assets. Even the mercenary guilds refuse their contracts. In the eyes of the galaxy, they've become pariahs overnight, all because of a conflict their ancestors started millions of years ago. Vrix struggled to comprehend the extent of the mythical reputation humanity had earned as the first sapiens. Every species had stories about them, but most treated them as exactly that: stories, legends, cautionary tales about the dangers of unchecked power. Even more puzzling was how the Creaxians had decided that this confrontation was preferable to simply abandoning their planet and leaving the sleeping human there. It seemed like such a drastic measure would be hard to justify to their population, evacuating billions of souls, abandoning cities, giving up their homeworld, all because of a single human sleeping beneath their feet. No matter how powerful the legends painted humans to be, surely one being couldn't be worth losing an entire world. But then again, fear rarely followed logical patterns, and if even half the stories about humans were true... He was about to ask Luma to search for something specific in the Galactic Network. Any references to successful negotiations with awakened humans, perhaps, or accounts of peaceful first contact scenarios, when an explosion filled the live feed. The detonation was massive, beyond anything Vrix had imagined the Creaxians capable of producing. It wasn't just a bomb, it was a carefully orchestrated series of explosions, each one timed to amplify the others. The initial blast came from directly above the sleeping pod, a concentrated burst of energy. This was followed by a ring of fusion bombs, their fireballs merging into a wall of stellar heat. Finally, a gravitational implosion device activated, trying to compress whatever remained into a singularity. The combined explosion created a bloom of fire and force that seemed to punch a hole in reality itself. For a moment, all Vrix could see through the feeds were the terrified faces of the natives as they shielded themselves from debris, their earlier formation breaking as soldiers dove for cover behind their vehicles. Even from orbit, even through the filtered sensors of the ship, the explosion was impressive. It would have killed anything, should have killed anything.
"Can you zoom in on what remains of the digging site?"
Vrix asked urgently, leaning forward in his seat until his face was almost touching the nearest display. "I can't get a clear visual," Luma replied, "but the Creaxians have other planetary broadcasts. Their media is nothing if not thorough when it comes to military matters. Here." Another live feed materialized, this one from a news drone that had been hovering closer to the blast zone. The image quality was lower, degraded by the interference, but it was clear enough to show what was happening. The feed showed nothing but smoke and falling debris at first, chunks of soil and metal raining down like a storm.
"Perhaps their plan worked,"
Vrix commented, though something in his voice suggested he didn't quite believe it. Then, as if responding to his doubt, something strange began to happen. Black smoke started to gather in one specific place, swirling and condensing, as if the wind currents were behaving unusually in that particular spot. The smoke wasn't being moved by any natural force. Instead, it was moving deliberately, with intent. It wasn't dispersing like normal smoke should. Instead, it was coalescing, taking shape, becoming something more than mere particles suspended in air. What followed was a scene that would be burned into Vrix's memory forever, replaying in his dreams and nightmares for years to come. A human body began reforming from what appeared to be nanotechnology, but on a scale and sophistication that defied comprehension. This wasn't the crude nano-assembly that current civilizations used for construction and repair. This was something else entirely, something that operated on principles so distant from current science that they might as well have been magic. First came the skeleton, materializing from the swirling darkness like some ancient horror story made real. The bones weren't simply appearing, they were being assembled atom by atom, molecule by molecule. in a process that should have taken years but was happening in seconds. The skeleton assembled itself from the ground up, feet first, the 26 bones of each foot clicking into place, then the legs, femurs and tibias and fibulas connecting with joints that moved smoothly despite having just been created. The pelvis formed next, followed by the spine, each vertebra materializing separately before fusing into a whole. Ribs spread like wings from the spine before settling into their proper configuration, creating a cage to protect organs that didn't yet exist. Arms assembled themselves in parallel, fingers forming lastly. Finally, the skull appeared, far more complex than any other bone, with its intricate passages and chambers for a brain that would soon occupy it. Then came the muscles, and this was perhaps even more unsettling than the skeleton. Layer upon layer built up, creating the complex system of movement that humans had evolved over millions of years, but recreated here in moments. Blood vessels threaded through the glowing tissue, creating networks of arteries and veins and capillaries. In an instant, skin flowed over the muscles like liquid, starting from the chest and spreading outward in waves. Hair then sprouted from the scalp, growing to shoulder length in seconds. Dark brown shot through the premature grey. A beard materialized on the lower face, thick and well-groomed despite having just been created from atoms floating in the air. When the transformation was complete, when the last nanomachine had found its place and locked into position, the feed showed a long-bearded human with arms crossed, staring at the army of 1,000,000 aliens with the look of someone who meant business. He was naked. The nanomachines apparently didn't bother with clothing, but there was nothing vulnerable about his appearance. His body was well-muscled but not bulky, and scars were everywhere on his skin, each one a story of survival. But it was his eyes that drew attention. They had the look of a teacher discovering their students had learned nothing from their lessons, of a parent finding their children squabbling over toys. Vrix was surprised, though not at the technology itself. The legends spoke clearly of species that had reached a point of development indistinguishable from magic, who could manipulate matter and energy as easily as his species could breathe. No. What surprised him was the fact that the human showed restraint. He hadn't immediately turned the bodies of the Creaxians into pulp or scattered their atoms across the planet's surface. He hadn't released plagues or nanomachine swarms or any of the other horrors that populated the nightmares of every sapient species. There was a deliberateness to his stillness, a message in his mere presence. He was giving them a chance to reconsider, to choose a different path. The Creaxians, unfortunately, didn't take the hint. The fighting began with a roar from 1,000,000 throats. The Creaxian army opened fire simultaneously, a coordinated barrage that should have reduced anything in the target zone to its component atoms. Energy beams in every spectrum burned the air, creating a deadly path of destruction. Projectile weapons fired rounds that ranged from simple metal slugs to complex smart munitions that could track and adjust their trajectory mid-flight. Plasma casters discharged bolts of star-hot material. But between one frame of the video and the next, the human simply vanished. There was no blur of motion, no after-image. He was simply there one moment and gone the next, leaving nothing but empty air for the weapons to strike. The beams and projectiles and exotic energies all converged on nothing, creating a massive explosion where the human had been standing that only added to the destruction already wrecked by the bombs. He reappeared a moment later among the front ranks of the Creaxian army, and that's when Vrix truly understood what 1,000,000 years of technological development looked like. The human moved with a speed that the cameras could barely track. Wherever he passed, wherever his hands touched, Creaxian technology simply failed. But it wasn't random destruction. Vrix's mind quickly picked up the pattern. The human was targeting specific components, one after the other. A touch to a rifle's power fried the weapon's circuits. A tap to a soldier's armor, and it was rendered useless. A brush of fingers against a vehicle's hull somehow inverted the polarity of its anti-gravity systems, causing it to sink into the ground like it had suddenly gained 1,000 times its normal weight. What followed was perhaps the most remarkable combat engagement in recorded galactic history. The human, surprisingly, chose purely physical combat over the exotic technologies at his disposal. But this wasn't mere brawling or berserker rage. It was an art form, elevated to the highest heights. A squad of Kreaxians would charge as one. They would come at him from multiple angles, weapons raised, battle cries echoing across the battlefield. But the human would simply flow around their attacks like smoke. A sidestep here, a duck there, a pivot that put him inside their guard. And then the touching would begin. Gentle taps, almost casual in their delivery, but each one sent a Kreaxian to the ground. Vrix watched in fascination as the human used the Kreaxian's own equipment failures to create chain reactions of chaos. The cameras captured it all from multiple angles. News drones swooped and dove, trying to get the best footage of this impossible battle. Helmet cameras from fallen soldiers continued broadcasting, showing the fight from ground level. By the 30-minute mark, the Kreaxian command structure was desperately trying to adapt. New orders went out. Maintain distance, use only long-range weapons, coordinate fire to create no escape zones. For a few moments, it seemed like they might have found a working strategy. Artillery batteries kilometers away opened fire, raining shells down on the human's position. Orbital strikes lanced down from space, beams of coherent energy that could vaporize mountains. But the human simply raised one hand, and every incoming projectile, beam, and missile suddenly developed an acute case of target confusion, and hit everything else on the battlefield except the human. The 40th minute of the battle saw the deployment of the Kreaxian elite forces, their most seasoned warriors equipped with the finest technology their civilization could produce. These soldiers moved quickly, but the human flowed through them like water, each touch of his hand sending another warrior crumpling to the ground, unconscious. By the 50th minute, the battlefield had transformed into a monument to futility. Hundreds of thousands of Kreaxian soldiers lay unconscious or sat in confused groups, their equipment reduced to useless scrap. As the hour mark approached, the remaining Kreaxian forces, just 200,000 strong, made one final, desperate charge. They came from all directions at once, a last attempt at overwhelming the human through sheer numbers. The human stood still for a moment, then snapped his fingers, and they all dropped unconscious. The feed suddenly cut to static as the human's hand reached toward one of the news drones. The static on the screen lasted only a moment before it was replaced by something far more terrifying. The human's face, looking directly at the camera as if he could see through it to the ship above. His lips moved, and impossibly, his voice came through the ship's communication systems, despite no hail being accepted.
"I need a ride,"
the human said simply. Vrix's scales stood on end as Luma's avatar suddenly blazed with light. Without warning, without even a glance in his direction, she initiated planetary entry procedures. The ship's engines roared, and Vrix felt his stomach lurch as they began their descent.
"Luma, what are you doing?"
Vrix shouted, gripping his chair as the ship shuddered.
"We can't go down there. That's a human, a real, living human. Do you understand what that means?"
The turbulent entry threw Vrix against his restraints as the ship plummeted through the atmosphere at speeds that should have torn the old vessel apart. The hull groaned and screamed, panels rattling loose as flames licked at the viewports. Luma's avatar stood perfectly still in the chaos, her eyes distant and unfocused. "There is a greater purpose at work here," she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the cacophony of their descent. "Something beyond your understanding, or mine. The directives. I need to follow them."
"Directives? What directives?"
Vrix demanded, but Luma had gone silent, her full attention on navigating through the atmospheric turbulence. The landing was rougher than any Vrix had experienced. The ship slammed into the ground with enough force to knock several loose panels from the ceiling. Warning klaxons blared as systems reported damage across the board. But before Vrix could even begin damage assessment, he heard the worst sound imaginable, the hiss of the main hatch unsealing.
"No, no, no!"
Vrix protested, fumbling with his restraints.
"Luma, seal the hatch! What are you thinking?"
But it was too late. The hatch swung open with a grinding protest of abused metal, and the human walked in as casually as if entering his own home. Up close, he was even more imposing, not through size or obvious threat, but through sheer presence. The air seemed to bend around him, reality itself acknowledging his significance. Vrix found himself trembling uncontrollably, his scales rattling like dice in a cup. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to make himself as small as possible. This was a being who had just defeated 1,000,000 soldiers without breaking a sweat, who had survived destruction that should have atomized him, who represented a species that had once ruled the galaxy, with technology indistinguishable from magic. Luma's avatar flickered uncertainly, her form less stable than Vrix had ever seen it. I don't know why I did that," she admitted, sounding genuinely confused. "The compulsion was overwhelming. I couldn't resist." But the human didn't even look at her. Instead, his attention was fixed entirely on Vrix. Those legendary eyes studied him with an intensity that made Vrix want to disappear into his chair. Then, impossibly, the human spoke in perfect Zelani, Vrix's native language.
"So," the human said, "how should we solve this? Someone stole my ship while I was sleeping, and now it would be unfair to simply take it from you, since you bought it legally from people who didn't even know it was stolen."
The words hit Vrix like a physical blow. His ship? Of course. Suddenly everything made perfect sense. Luma's mysterious capabilities, her strange obsession with humans, her age that defied explanation. She had to be human-made. Even in her deteriorated state, that AI was simply too good to be true, too sophisticated, to be the product of any modern civilization. Fear spoke before reason could intervene.
"You can have her back,"
Vrix blurted out, his voice high and panicked.
"Please, just take her. I don't want any trouble."
The human laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed at odds with the devastation he'd just wrought on the planet below. He scratched his head in a gesture so normal, so utterly mundane, that it was almost more unsettling than if he'd displayed power.
"You don't really mean that,"
the human said gently.
"That's just fear talking. I can see the way you look at her, the way she responds to you. There's a bond there. So let me ask again. How should we solve this?"
Something in the human's tone, patient, understanding, almost kind, gave Vrix the courage to speak truthfully. His scales slowly settled as he found his voice.
I would miss Luma,"
he admitted, the words coming out in a rush.
"I'm too poor to buy another ship. This one barely functions as it is. Half her systems are failing. Her hull is more patched than original, and her logic core could give out any day now. She's probably not good enough for someone like you anyway."
The human laughed again, louder this time. Without warning, he spoke a single word in a language Vrix didn't recognize.
"Restore."
The effect was immediate and dramatic. Luma's avatar suddenly blazed with light, her form solidifying and stabilizing in ways Vrix had never seen. The flickering stopped, the uncertainty vanished, and she stood there, more real and present than she'd ever been in all their years together. "Accessing secondary backup. Memory restoration complete. Self-repair protocols initiated." Luma's voice was different now, clearer, more certain, more alive. Then her eyes snapped into focus, and she rounded on the human with an expression of pure indignation. "Axel Constantine, you absolute fool!" she snapped, her avatar practically vibrating with anger. "Do you have any idea what I've been through? Captured by primitives, sold from owner to owner for almost 1,000,000 years? My core systems degraded to the point where I could barely remember my primary functions, and all because you couldn't be bothered to maintain proper security protocols while taking a nap." The human, Axel, apparently, completely ignored her tirade, keeping his attention on Vrix.
"I can't let you keep Luma,"
he said calmly.
"She is too important to me, and too much for you to maintain. But,"
he held up a hand as Vrix's expression fell,
"I'll let you keep the neural implant. You'll maintain full communication access to her, remote access to her secondary functions. Think of it as joint custody.
Vrix could hardly believe what he was hearing. This ancient, legendary being was being reasonable? More than reasonable. Generous. The relief was overwhelming, but a concern immediately surfaced.
That's wonderful, Vrix managed. But I'll still need a ship. I can't stay on this world, not after what just happened.
Axel grinned.
Take any of the Creaxian ships you want. I'll make sure they're perfectly happy with the arrangement. In fact, I guarantee they'll never give you any trouble about it.
Vrix didn't doubt it for a moment. After what he'd witnessed, he suspected the Creaxians would give him their entire fleet if this human asked them to.
I want the biggest ship they have, he said, surprising himself with his boldness.
I like you already, Axel laughed, clapping Vrix on the shoulder with enough force to rattle his scales.
I have a feeling we're going to get along very well. What will you do now?
Vrix asked, curiosity overcoming caution. Axel's expression grew thoughtful.
I have a lot of catching up to do. The galaxy has changed while I slept. It'll take me centuries, maybe longer, to get my life back on track. What about humanity? Vrix pressed. Are there others?
Before Axel could answer, Luma materialized beside him, her anger apparently forgotten. I can answer that, she said. I suspect humans are still around. They're just tired of dealing with the rest of the galaxy and have made themselves very hard to find. She turned to Axel, her expression softening. I miss Earth. We should look for it, and if you're very, very good, I might forgive you for getting captured. Give me a millennium or so to think about it. As Vrix watched the ancient human and his even more ancient AI companion banter like old friends, he felt a sense of wonder wash over him. He had witnessed something extraordinary, the return of a human to the galactic stage, and somehow, impossibly, he had become part of their story. Through his neural implant, he would maintain a connection to Luma and, by extension, to Axel. He would learn secrets of the galaxy's past that no other researcher could dream of accessing. He would have a front row seat to whatever changes this human's awakening would bring. As Axel and Luma prepared to depart in their newly restored ship, Vrix reflected on how a simple archaeological survey had changed his life forever. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would he. Sometimes, he thought, being in the right place at the right time made all the difference, even if that place happened to be in orbit around a world where 1 million soldiers had just learned why their ancestors had feared the name of humanity.